Welcome to the final panel of the day. My name is Linda Deno. I actually am not at the UC Berkeley Law School except as a fellow. I am actually at the University of Arizona, but I took it as a compliment. These days it doesn't really matter. And I am moderating this panel today. I'm really excited to introduce two people that I had never met before today, and one person I've known for forever. I'm going to start with Jessica Winkle, who is Winkle, you told me that, and Jessica Winkle, who is Associate Professor at the Department of Public and International Affairs at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. She is also a Senior Fellow at the Breakthrough Institute, where her latest contribution is A Climate-Related Financial Risk Boondoggle, Bad Methods and Conflicts of Interest in the Attempt to Green Finance. Her professional work focuses on environmental policy and coastal risk, and she writes on Substack. It's the Conflicted Substack, from which I drew a quote that I hope everyone can appreciate. I know I do. There's an old joke about why God couldn't get tenure. He only wrote one book. It was a long time ago, and it was pretty controversial. Furthermore, while it may be true that he created the world and everything in it, what's he done lately? Should I all three? Are you ready? Okay, then I'll keep introducing, and we'll give you a little more time. Next, we have Lynn Kiesling, who is an economist who focuses on regulation, market design, and the economics of digitization and innovation in the electricity industry. She is director of the Institute for Regulatory Law and Economics in the Center on Law, Business, and Economics, a faculty fellow in the Paula M. Trenans Institute for Sustainability and Energy, an adjunct professor in the Master of Science in Energy and Sustainability program, all of these at Northwestern University. She is also an external faculty member of the Santa Fe Institute, a non-resident senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. In addition to her academic work, she has served as a member of the U.S. Department of Energy's Electricity Advisory Committee and member of the National Institute of Standards and Technology Smart Grid Advisory Committee, and an emerita member of the Grid-Wise Architectural Council. In her free time, she occasionally shows up on podcasts like the DER Task Force podcast, which named her the Queen of Power Markets. And Steve Hayward, next to me, is visiting professor at Pepperdine University's School of Public Policy. He's a senior fellow of public law and public policy at UC Berkeley Law School. Among his 10 books is the Almanac of Environmental Trends, and the highlight of his acting career is An Inconvenient Truth or Convenient Fiction, which the New York Times called a point-by-PowerPoint rebuttal of former Vice President Al Gore's global warming documentary. Jessica.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me here. I'm very excited to be back here. Last time I was here, I was graduating with my bachelor's from the university, so it's cool to be here. All right, so I want to talk about the lessons that we can draw about democracy and scientific expertise in the wake of the collapse of climate change politics. And I think it's I don't know if it's a permanent collapse, but it's certainly a collapse over the past year. I've been asked about this a couple of times, I studied under Roger Pielke. A lot of you guys follow him. This is part of something that we've been talking about for a long time, so if you follow his Substack, some of it might sound a little bit familiar. But I bring that up because so far I've had several questions about it. And yes, I do know him, and we continue to collaborate. So why should we care about experts and democracy? So the first part is we need experts in policy making. We have a very technologically advanced society. Our systems are complex. We need good information. And the other part of it is that it's sort of a tradition of American politics is to be concerned about protecting policymaking from capture by the experts that we're working with. So there's a campaign, and this is sort of, I don't know, if there's still a climate change politics, this is where it's at right now. But think about the technical expertise you would need to make your way through what they're talking about. There's some interesting things that one could talk about whoshouldpay.org, but more specifically, the entire idea, what you're looking at an issue through the lens of climate change science, into insurance and all that is insurance technology and the business of insurance, and then into this idea of economic collapse. So to make your way through this, to engage with it effectively, you need to know about climate change science, you need to know about weather extremes, you need to know about disasters, you need to know about disaster losses, you need to know about insurance rate making, the structure of insurance, and then you would need to know about the economy. So it would help if you knew a little bit about real estate trends, real estate pricing trends. This is an incredible level of technological politics that you have to make your way through to engage with it effectively. Or technocratic politics, I'm sorry. And so that's where that stands. Real quick, I gather a lot of people know this, but the messaging on losses and disasters conflicts significantly with analytical understanding of losses, right? So basically advocacy messaging has been, look at all this climate change, you can see it in our disasters and you can see it in our losses, and then the analytics of it is more like, no, that's really just our expansion of our urban centers, our socioeconomics, we're wealthier. Maybe there's a little piece in there for climate change, but really it's just our changing social world. So that's the underlying knowledge about losses that is lost in this whole like climate risk thing. There's another piece to it, and it has to deal with the models. The idea that even though we know that the losses are a reflection of our societies, what is going on in the models that may be used in financial decisions, whether that's rate making or investments? Are we simply performing climate risk or climate change risk in our financial decision making? And by performing it, we're making it real in so much that you gotta pay for it. This has been something that I've followed for a really long time. It came up earlier in 2005. There were some model changes in the reinsurance industry that made it salient then. Now we're seeing it again. But it's also starting to make headlines. So the coroner article is from a Wall Street Journal article focusing on some issues with Zillow and their use of a climate risk model and people's concerns that it's affecting real estate pricing. So when you move from this climate risk, insurance issues to economic collapse, is it really a climate change thing, or is it actually an issue with how people are using models? And historically, right, so like, in fact, there was a concern with the global economic crisis around how people were using the models, gaming the models, providing a false sense of security. Okay. So modeled climate risk has turned into big business. Will it continue to be big business? I don't know, but right now it is, and it has been for a while. So this was a New York Times article from a week or a couple of weeks ago or whatever, saying that the financial industry has turned their back on this idea of climate risk. It seems to be pretty good, still going, but we'll see. Anyways, it's big business. It had started off I would say with this big business, you're seeing, or I'm seeing, a closer relationship between industry and research scientists, academic scientists. And this has been going on since the early 90s, where the reinsurance industry started funding academic research, primarily in hurricanes, but also wildfires, other stuff, and creating a relationship between academic researchers and industry. It was never I've argued, it's never been well acknowledged in the literature about these relationships. Over time, that grew, and certainly it grew a lot over the last 10 years when you started to see larger investment firms get involved in climate research. There's two messages around this. One is some sort of apocalyptic scenario where everything falls apart investment-wise, and we see the end of capitalism as we know it. And this is a guy involved with a German reinsurance firm. And then the other side is a lot of money. So this quote is from Fermat Capital's CEO. They deal with catastrophe bonds. This was from a couple years ago where he's talking about, he's like, the media dynamic, the talking about climate change constantly, this idea of climate risk is making us a ton of money. And so the politics of climate change became also married to the investment activity around climate risk. There was earnings, from what I hear, or what I understand, this level of earning is unheard of elsewhere in the market, around catastrophe bonds. And then also property casualty is doing great as well over the last several years, at the same time as everybody's talking about all the climate risk. So there's a bit of in any sort of area of protracted policy making, there's a tendency to develop sub-governments, and a classic sub-government is the Iron Triangle, where basically you have the policymakers, mainly congressional committees, specific congressional committees, some sort of industry lobby, and a bureaucracy, your rule makers, all scratching each other's back, creating a very closed network of ideas. That is a problem for anybody else trying to access the agenda, trying to give new ideas, trying to give new ways of doing things. What holds that together is the social relationships and key ideas, where everybody's got the same worldview, and that's what they're working towards. So I think it's important to consider the speed and scale at which things moved over the Biden administration. And this is not knocking any specific administration, but to actually consider what happened. So this is Brian Deese, Biden, and Gina McCarthy. And what you're seeing, Deese came into this position as an economic advisor to Biden, straight from the sustainability division from BlackRock. And then, of course, you had McCarthy, who came in from NRDC, and then prior to that, the EPA. Very quickly, you had several EOs, one which was, we're going to elevate our experts, right, listen to the science. You had the scientific community, then you had the orientation of the government's outlook being around a climate crisis, followed very quickly by a EO to organize the entire federal government around this idea of climate-related financial risk. And the broader heading of that being climate risk. Presidents strengthen iron triangles or weaken them. They don't necessarily get rid of them, but they can strengthen them or weaken them. Right here, you're seeing a very strong strengthening of the relationship that made climate risk happen over the last several years. The concept of climate risk doesn't originate in science. It originates, in my opinion, here with the Institutional Investors Summit on Climate Risk. It was organized by Ceres, which is it's an NGO that kind of creates a coalition of investor interests, where they started talking about how climate risk was a financial risk that needed better disclosures. They were going to start moving towards asking the SEC for better disclosures and encouraging investment firms to advance disclosures in climate risk. If you follow this concept and you say, okay, well, who's talking about climate risk in Congress? These are the top congressional committees. The first three, financial services in the House, banking, housing, and urban affairs in the Senate, are all dealing with financial institutions. And then you have appropriations, which is giving out money, right? So this is where climate risk, that concept, had come to root in these committees. If you consider who's the lobby then, your lobby is your major financial firms, which is not really all that surprising. But if you go look at, like, let's say, documents that claim to be dealing with the climate risk landscape, these are the people that they're talking about. And they're all they're investment firms and they're analytic firms. So they're selling the idea of climate risk. There's also an interesting advisory committee that was created to give information or expertise to the Financial Stability Oversight Committee underneath the Treasury. And they also had lobby, industry representation there, which makes sense, but. All right, so then you have the rulemaking. That's when you ended up with the SEC rule. You had the FSOC report coming out on climate risk. Federal Reserve System moves to engage this stuff in climate and bank stress testing. Federal Insurance Office gets involved. You start to see the movement with your rulemakers on this topic. So you have the triangle. What is classically important in the triangle are those experts. The experts that can move seamlessly between all the 3 points on the triangle, engaging with information, and holding together that conception of risk, or conception of whatever it is. They can engage with the peer-reviewed literature, produce information that reinforces the worldview of the select interest, and they work among it. So this is in 1981 work on the Iron Triangle, the military-industrial complex. And he's talking about the role that advisors make, and that what ends up happening is alternative or public perspectives are absent, only a limited range of technical disagreement survives.
Jessica.
Yes. Oh, no. Okay.
2. Yeah.
Anyway, so if you look at the advisory group under the Financial Stability Oversight Council, if you look at those people, not only who they represent on paper, but then also their board memberships, right? You start to get these analytic groups that have advanced the idea of climate risk, extreme climate risk, and then also developed methodologies preferred methodologies, emissions accounting and stuff like that, and the ways of disclosing. You also had the Sabine Center for Climate Change Law was represented, and you had some as part of university academics that are involved in all this, moving around. Okay. This gets rooted into your assessment reports over time, and then gets defended, right? So you have, it's kind of a long story of how it got rooted there, but it got rooted there. And then you have the experts moving around the triangle, engaged in producing the reports, producing the research for the reports, and it's all reinforcing. When things start to get challenged, particularly the scenarios, the emission scenarios, it became, over the last several years, there was really strong challenge to these scenarios. The White House stepped in, and they said, we're going to give it a legitimizing argument. And they say, no, don't look over there. Just keep doing what you're doing. You can keep using these scenarios. And so they keep reinforcing that triangle and the methodology. So This is a bigger deal than I think people give it credit for. There's been a growth in the financial industry's relationship with researchers that is significant, often in prominent places. Prominent researchers have significant roles or relationships with the financial industry. And there's all kind, or litigation as well. And there's all kinds of stuff that is not well represented in the literature or disclosed. What happens when there's undisclosed COI in research? Well, in the past, in medicine, there have been issues of serious misconduct and patient death, and Congress got involved in trying to better understand all that. But what happens in areas like climate change and economics? Nobody really dies, right? Like it's all dealing with predictions and projections and investments and stuff like that. But there are problems. There are clearly problems. Regulatory capture, which I just discussed, distortions in research trajectories. Climate has had such a large ranging effect on research in so many disciplines. And this is part of that. The loss of public trust and technocratic politics. And ultimately, an undermining of good science advice. And then the lack of democratic inclusion. Nobody can access the agenda outside of this small group of people, and they're reinforcing ideas. So we fixed it, right? We got the chainsaw, we got the strongly worded EO, we got the report, we took our toys and went home, and then we said, okay, we're just gonna restructure the whole thing. I don't know if that fixed it, but it's definitely a long road ahead. The damage that has been done to the US research enterprise in a lot of different areas is significant. And my belief is very few people understand exactly what happened in climate, the relationship between that science and finance. The universities are just trying to hold on. Professors have no idea what's going on. US researchers, the ones that I interact with, they're disheartened. And there's a credibility issue. I think as far as the solidity around messaging. We tore it all down, but we don't have something that replaces it in the same way of the status quo kind of existing message that was there already. All right, thank you.
Interesting. Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. Now for something completely different. I'm going to talk about electricity, and in particular, I'm going to talk about electricity technology and markets, because markets, as we know, are knowledge ecosystems that enable innovation, and I hope that through that path, I may, at the end, say a couple of things that connect to the topic of the first two panels, but maybe not. We'll find out. I've also written quite a bit on the Texas electricity model, so I always love talking about electricity in Texas, and so I'm glad to do that. And I am taking the title of the panel pretty seriously, the future of electricity in an AI-driven economy. And so I want to focus I want my focus to be essentially kind of bringing you up to date on what's going on in the US in terms of the use of electricity in data centers. Because as you might have heard, AI is a thing. And there are a lot of data centers and are forecast to be even more. And so that's going to be the focus of my attention. But one of the things that I do, I have a background in economic history, and so I think it's really important to start with some of the historical and theoretical fundamentals. And so when we talk about electricity, and I'm gonna have a couple of remarks here to say about its regulation, the status of electricity as a regulated industry. It's a good idea to start with the economics. One of the reasons why electricity is as heavily economically regulated by the state, and by state I mean state generally, but also at the state level and at the federal level, is because of the historical characteristics of the technologies and the implications of those technologies for the cost structure in the industry. And this shows up in two categories in economics: economies of scale and economies of scope. So economies of scale, I love to illustrate with this, the picture on the left. This is the turbine hall underneath Niagara Falls in 1895. And there's, I think, 24 of these turbines underneath Niagara Falls, because boy, is there a lot of force coming down that drop of water. If this guy standing next to this one is of average height in 1895, so about 5'8", I think the technical term for that machine is it's huge. And there's 24 of them. And so operating at that kind of scale was unprecedented in the late 19th century. This is one of the most massive and consequential contributions of innovation, was the ability to produce electricity at this scale. We also saw the economies of scale like this from railroads and telecom, but in electricity, it really showed up. The other characteristic that's important is economies of scope. I like this picture on the right because it's a very early picture of multimodal transportation. We have a horse-driven buggy, an old horse and buggy on the left, a horse-driven streetcar, an electric streetcar, and then right over in the right-hand side, you can see the little teeny corner of the wheel of an internal combustion engine-driven vehicle. So we've got all four modes of transportation. The electricity industry was founded in electric lighting. That was its product. It was going to produce lighting, and that was it. And then over time, through entrepreneurial thinking, mostly Sam Insel at Commonwealth Edison in Chicago, said, hey, you know what? If we electrify the transit during the day when we're not selling lighting, we can get a whole lot more utilization out of our existing generation capacity and make a ton more money. And so that's economies of scope, where you use one set of assets that one company owns to make two different types of products. You put these two together, you get the characteristic that in economics we call natural monopoly. Natural monopoly is where you have this downward sloping long-run average cost curve, which means the more you produce, the lower your cost per unit. And this was happened at an unprecedented scale in these railroad, telecom, electricity industries in the late 19th century. But this poses a problem. The problem, and this is especially a problem politically in the progressive era, because if the natural tendency of this cost structure is to become one firm, doesn't that just mean that this firm is going to crank up prices, reduce output, and that would make consumers worse off? And so, of course, the argument was we need to regulate this industry so that doesn't happen, which is how we get to that purple dot, lowercase d. That is the sweet spot, which in theory is where, of course, the regulator, the omniscient, fully informed, not prone to any kind of capture or influence, is going to, in the public interest, get us to D. And that as a result, we will have a huge amount of consumer surplus. The regulated utility will be paid to recover their fixed and variable costs, including the opportunity cost of their capital, and we will just have a little teeny tiny bit of waste or deadweight loss. That's in theory. We all know, of course, in reality that that's a bit of a fiction. But that's the theory. So fast forward to today, right? And so we're fast forwarding now 120 years, right? So regulation of that sort really started in the States in 1907. And so fast forward a century, and the industry that we have today, both technologically and economically, and the economic context in which it sits, are very, very different from what we had a century ago. And I think one of the things that we are learning today is that regulation, especially in this industry, that regulation is more historically contingent and more technologically contingent than the progressive era reformers realized when they instituted this regulation. That we have all sorts of different new technologies, which I'll talk about more in a second. We've got an expanding breadth of state policy objectives to include environmental and affordability and reliability and economic growth, in addition to the safety and reliability that were the hallmark of electricity regulation over the 20th century. We have started, over the past 30 years, chipping away at bringing markets to bear to enable the flexibility that's required to benefit from all of these new technologies and the new dynamism that we've experienced over the past 30 years. Texas is, for me, the prototype of the use of markets in this beneficial way. But the details do really matter. One of the areas where even Texas has not done a great job is in enabling markets to have rules that emerge that allocate risk well. And so that's another thing that is a work in progress, I will say. And what's going on right now with data centers illustrates, it just encapsulates and illustrates all of this very fast-moving scenario, the fast-moving landscape that we inhabit right now. And so all of that was just to say, this is a very staid, slow-moving, small c conservative industry and its regulation, and we all of a sudden, because of the rate of change in digital technologies, and now when you throw AI on that with data centers, this is an unprecedented rate of change, and the industry and its regulation are having a really difficult time grappling with it, and it's producing a lot of tensions. Oop, some funkiness in my header, and in particular, so the landscape that I laid out for you going back to Niagara Falls is very much this picture in the red. The one-way road, the generator generates, and the vertically integrated monopoly utility, has a wires network, and then we, the end users at the end, flip the switch and the light goes on. But now we're in that green world where we have such a variety of both supply-related and demand-related technologies, whether it's different types of generation technologies, different ability to use our personal technologies to control and automate what goes on in terms of our energy consumption in the home. And in terms of my own research, how do we send prices to those devices and submit our bids to participate in markets to control what those devices do. So it's a very, very different technological landscape. And the future, the future that AI is contributing to is really, it's not springing like Athena out of the head of Zeus. It is being built on some digital structure that we've been putting in place over the past 20 years. But what I think the growth of AI illustrates the extent to which what used to just be done with electromechanical switches and dials and a person in a control room in the power system can now all be done and be automated at the edge of the grid. So when we talk about edge computing in digital networks, you should also think about edge computing as being an important phenomenon in power systems, in power networks. And that way we can use digital networks to connect to and enable autonomous control of all sorts of different kinds of supply and demand resources and entities, firms, businesses, homes, that are connected together in the power systems, in networks. And data centers just embody this. And are kind of accelerating this in a way that I think for those of us who work on questions of regulatory reform, This is, in a way, call it a catalyst, call it the camel's nose under the tent. This is going to be a phenomenon that will lead to a lot of serious and deep rethinking of some of these fundamental century-plus old principles, assumptions on which the natural monopoly regulation of electric utilities is built. This is Google's data center in New Albany, Ohio, looking pretty slick from the aerial view. Data center power demand, the map, to look at the map, the blue dots, and they're scaled by size in terms of how many megawatts of electricity demand the data center will be using. The blue ones are ones that are already in operation. The yellow ones are ones that are planned. And so there are a few things to point out. Number one, we all know that Virginia is kind of, ground zero is Data Center Alley, as it's called. That there's a lot of growth also planned in South Carolina and Georgia, quite a bit around Chicago. But of course, we all want to look at Texas. Look at how much data center activity there is in Texas. So if you've been hearing about this locally, here's your evidence to support what's going on here. The big yellow one in West Texas there, that's Stargate, which I think is a gigawatt size plan, campus of data centers. But also, Utah. So there's a lot of planned activity going on. And some forecasts suggest that data centers will lead to electricity demand doubling or even tripling, depending on whose forecast you believe, by 2030. And this is an industry, like I said, that plods along, and if you have a 3% growth rate per year, that's a big year. And so the idea of doubling or tripling by 2030, mind-blowing, right? Add to that the fact that this is the array of the existing forecasts for what data center demand is going to be in the U.S. From the EPRI forecasts, which are their scenarios are on the low end, BCG's is on the high end, and you have a range in between. And so notice the variety, and notice also how much growth we're looking at compared to the initial year in 2014. All of this is to say there is a lot of uncertainty here, and this isn't like risk where we know a probability distribution and we know that there's some probability that we're going to pick that ball out of the urn. This is what I would call Knightian uncertainty, where we don't even know what the probability distribution is because we've never been in this scenario before. And that's a very unsettling place for a large, capital-intensive, rate-regulated industry to be. That takes, 5 to 10 years for them to build their capital-intensive infrastructure, and the mismatch of that with the 18 months that it takes to build and power up a data center if you can get the power. And so, for that reason, the hallmarks of the conversation that we've been having in electricity economics and regulation have been, number one, as I've already alluded to, is regulation up to the task? Are regulated utilities up to the task? This is going to be an opportunity for us to rethink, and especially for those of us who would like to see more individual autonomy, individual decision making, and the role of markets in the day-to-day lives of people. This shift away from regulation and towards markets, because regulation is going to have to really change. That's something that's very important. And the other part is the technology. And technology is really, when coupled with markets, is enabling what is becoming kind of the hallmark word that those of us who work in electricity economics these days are talking about. And, okay, Josh, say it with me. This is the F word, flexibility. This is all we can talk about is flexibility. Can that data center be flexible? Or is it just running all out, 8,760 hours a year because serving us those cat memes and serving us the caricatures of what we do in our job, which is, I think, the meme du jour from AI. that those are so valuable that we're just running all out to try to provide the AI services for people? Or are there ways that they can operate, that they can change their operation to use and can use what is some of the slack in power systems? And there is slack in power systems. The capacity utilization in transmission systems is below 50% on average. It's just one of the things that digital technologies are enabling us to do is to think more and to act more on the timing, that we can change the timing of when and how we coordinate. And so, of course, if you want to change the timing of when and how you coordinate and have that be technology enabled, we're talking markets, right? This is an illustration from ERCOT, right, the Texas wholesale market, from August 20th of 2024. Y'all may remember it was a pretty hot week. These are the batteries that are participating in the ERCOT market. And the blue shows the hours, and that starts at midnight and goes to 11:59. The blue are the hours when the batteries are charging. And the red is the hours when the batteries are discharging. And of course, the height gives you the quantities. And so this is a brand new technology that over the past 5 years has become much more energy efficient, much more economical. So you get much more bang for the buck out of owning a battery than you did 5 years ago because the technology has improved that much. And so, these batteries are charging at night, discharging a little bit in the morning when people are taking showers and making coffee, charging again in the morning, and especially in the morning, what are they charging with? They're charging from the solar panels that have kicked on because it's now sunny out. And so during the day, the batteries are charging, and then what happens at 6 p.m. when the sun goes down? All those solar panels drop off, but what do the batteries do? The batteries kick on and get paid really, really well to serve us with the power to cook dinner, hang out with our kids, watch Netflix, do the things that we want to do. And yeah, make some cat memes, of course. All of which is to say that markets plus technologies and a variety of different technologies, right? Reliability of electric service is a portfolio idea. And so the technologies all are different, and that's beneficial. So this has some implications, and I'm going to end here. Digital technologies are transforming both the supply and demand in electricity and at various scales, from residential, sending, my ability for my thermostat to bid into a power market all the way up to data centers. But the pace of change is so fast that prediction is very difficult, and we are facing a lot of not just risk, but uncertainty, and having to make high capital intensive decisions in the face of that uncertainty. And this is going to mean that we are in a period of some dramatic regulatory change. And so those of us who work on markets and regulatory reform, we have an opportunity to make that argument. Because markets are decentralized coordinators and processes of error correction. So if you're in the face of such uncertainty, you're going to make some bad decisions and people are going to screw some stuff up. What do you want? You want to participate in processes of coordination that enable you to see the error, learn from the error, and have people who can maybe profit from the error. And that's what markets do for us. And again, Texas is a hallmark for this. And so I'm glad to share that idea with you today. And now I will lateral to Steve.
Well, thanks. I'm glad to be going after Lynn for reasons that will become apparent in due course. So I'm actually here in place of Mark Mills today, who had to drop out a few days ago when an illness came up in his family. I am no Mark Mills. No one is. So I'm going to do something different. I'm going to talk about the view from California a little bit. I am a Californian. It is nice to get out of California and visit America. And also grateful to the Civitas Institute for the invitation to get drawn back more fully into energy policy, although I'm teaching it again after a 10-year hiatus. Most of the last 10 years I've spent doing conventional political science, a little bit of law, And actually, the last panel inspired me to say, if I was doing a chapter of a memoir, I'd say the last decade was from Erie to Erie and back again, which is I used to trace out things like pollution levels in Lake Erie over time, to then thinking about the Erie case referenced before, and now I'm back to pollution levels in Lake Erie again. Although, as I say, energy. And I'm always a little bashful to talk about Texas because Lynn literally wrote the book on Texas and knows 100 times more than I do. So I'm hoping she will correct me gently for my errors or omissions here, of which there will be many. So it's a fun thing to make comparisons between California and Texas. Some of them you know, some of them you may not know how really dramatic they are. I mean, everyone knows that you can in Texas get half the house, twice the house for half the cost as you can in California. But I think it's actually worse than that. There's another statistic I like to point to that is more illustrative of the dysfunction of my home state, which is that Harris County, the home of the greater Houston metro area, has several times in the last few years, just Harris County, had more housing starts than the entire state of California. Now, some of those housing starts are Californians leaving. We're now up to, I think, 1.6 million people net have left the state now in the last 10 years. How do you take a state like California and make that many people want to leave? Is there any other sunny state where they're losing people? No, I don't think so. We're the champs at this. By the way, there is an irony here. I think it's really one of those cunning of history moments that the no-growth movement really starts in the Bay Area about 50 years ago, hugely successful, spreads across the country. And now, if you're following this, we now have the YIMBY movement, which are progressives who are saying there's too much regulation. Now they're confused about it, but I never thought I would see this. And where did it start? It started in the Bay Area. So we've come full circle. And it's interesting that one of the leaders of this movement is the most radical left member of the California state legislature. Again, a comic novelist wouldn't think of this. You may know that California's unemployment rate is more than a full percentage point higher than the nation. It's one reason we're exporting people. Our poverty rate is the highest in the nation by a lot. California, do it this way. Texas spends about a third less per pupil in its public schools and gets much higher test scores than California students do, even though the demographics of the two states are about the same. And we, by one calculation, depends on how many homeless you think we are producing in California. We've spent $25 billion at least in the last 10 years. That's, again, depending on how many you think, it's over $125,000 per homeless person, yet it keeps going up. I may say a thing or two about gasoline prices, although maybe not. I come to Texas and I look at the pump and say, is that for half gallon? Is that really for a gallon, right? And then finally, California can't build anything, or not much, or with great difficulty and expense. I'll just give you two examples. One is, we passed 12 years ago a bond measure to expand water supplies, including the first reservoir in more than 50 years. That was 12 years ago. Construction is expected to begin finally next year, and none of the projects this bond is funding are expected to come online before 2029. But my favorite is back in 2018, Los Angeles County voters approved a half-cent sales tax for transportation improvements in the county, and it included a $365 million 8-mile bike lane along the Los Angeles River. Now, if you've been to LA, the Los Angeles River is not the San Antonio Riverwalk. It's a concrete storm drain channel. It was supposed to be open last year. You will not be surprised to hear that construction has not yet begun, and the total all-in cost is now estimated at more than $1 billion for an 8-mile bike lane. I don't know how this is possible, except in California we're geniuses. I could go on with all of that. Now, this led to the Atlantic Monthly about 3 weeks ago, an article written by one of their most progressive staff writers saying, California's progressive policies seem to have been reverse engineered from Republican Party attack ads. So that's how crazy things are. There is one area where a lot of people in California, especially energy geeks, envy Texas, and that is in energy. So, the big issue these days is we're worried about electricity prices going up, right? I think the general trend looks like this. This is unadjusted for inflation, which is important, but it's that little, if I got the thing working, it's a little tail up there to the right. You can all see it and make it out. And if you followed the last election campaign, affordability of electricity was a big issue in New Jersey, I guess in Virginia as well, although their rates are actually kind of average. And one question to ask is this really a California story? In other words, one of my go-to persons on energy out in California, with the individual in particular, Severin Borenstein, who runs the Energy Institute at the Haas Business School at Berkeley, also relied upon heavily by the California Energy Commission for analysis. He thinks it's a California story and that we're pulling up the whole national average. He offers this chart, which is inflation adjusted, so it doesn't quite match up with the last one, but the bottom line is the nation as a whole, and the top line is California. Doesn't look like a very a big spread, but to unravel this, we have to get into the way electricity markets work, and that's why I keep Lynn around, because I really hate doing it, because I feel like the unfortunate monkey who, once you get into this, you want to kill yourself. But if you do it more graphically, here's one map that's been popular, and you see California and the Northeast have the highest rates. Or I think this one's a little better. This is percent increases, which shows California in the last 6 years, 39% increase in electricity rates. Texas, 7% over the same time, right? The average price, according to EIA from 2 years ago, Energy Information Administration, 27 cents a kilowatt hour in California, 9.8 cents a kilowatt hour in Texas. And I know Lynn knows this, maybe Texans here know this. Peak demand in Texas is 3 times peak demand in California. So, hottest days of the year in California. And by the way, the California peak demand level has been flat for the last 10, 15 years. I'm not sure the trends are here. I haven't looked them up, but...
Doubled in 5 years.
Has it?
Is that right, Josh?
Oh, yeah, that probably sounds... just seeing those data... We're not building a lot of data centers in California. We can, talk about that some if we want. Now, Lynn mentioned batteries. I'm really glad she did, because I am also. One thing is that California, we are building, not manufacturing the batteries, but boy, we are installing them fast. And you can see here that battery storage, California, we're clobbering Texas 2-1. And we're getting some similar results to the ones Lynn showed you, although I'm going to present it in a somewhat different way than she did. But then what does Texas have over California? Wind power. So here's wind and solar together for the 2 states. And California actually hasn't really added much wind capacity at all for the last 10 years. It's all been solar. Texas has gone crazy with wind. Now, there are a lot of reasons for that, which, again, Lynn knows better than I do, but I think having your own grid here under ERCOT, which has its pluses and minuses, actually makes it easier to integrate all these resources, right? That's one reason for it. The other one is... it's been a while since I've done this, but Texas decided to do the renewable portfolio standard game differently than most other states. Most states have a percentage target. We want 20% renewables by X year, 30% by Y year, 50% by Z year, and so forth. Texas instead did a numerical target for how many gigawatts of new renewable power they wanted. Now, I've always thought that my hypothesis is to play all this out in great detail, and again, Lynn could teach me this in an hour, maybe, if I was paying close attention. I've got to think this changes the decision-making of people based on sensible things like, the cost of capital. I think it changes how those calculations that are so contentious about the levelized cost of electricity come out. As opposed to doing percentage mandates where you're trying to satisfy a regulatory target which might not necessarily actually match up with actual power produced. Okay, now is this what I'm up to? No, I'm going to skip over that because I think my Texas numbers are wrong. Doesn't matter. So duck. If you're really an energy geek in California, Lynn knows what's coming, don't you? You are all about the duck curve. And normally I don't like to show charts like this because it's just busy, spaghetti straps and all. I like the simple ones. But this one's very popular. We call it the duck curve because what it represents is total power demand with wind and solar and other renewables, but mostly wind and solar backed out of it. And you can see that middle of the day, we get a lot of production of wind and solar power, so much so that we have a surplus in the middle of the day. This is from, this is a 8-year period, and every year that the duck's belly gets a little bit lower. Coming soon maybe to a Texas near you. I'm not sure where it all lays out yet. And I like to show a different version of what's happening here that tracks with what Lynn did. And this is now almost 2 years old, but here's the generation profile, 30th of April, 2024. And what you can see is the big solar bulge in the middle. Because boy, we've been putting in the solar power and also the batteries. And I think what's important is not only the solar bubble there, but to the right of it, you see in the green, the battery discharge. Here's what Lynn was also showing you for Texas, right? But what's happening there in this chart is a couple things. One is you still see that we're running natural gas and wind in the middle of the day, but nobody's much making any money at that time. And something's missing from the power supply here, and it's Diablo Canyon, our nuclear power plant, which still provides on an annual basis about 10% of California's total electricity output in the state. But of course, middle of April, middle of October, that's it's true everywhere, right, here in Texas too. It's the best weather, and that's when Diablo Canyon goes offline twice a year for maintenance and so forth. By the way, I predicted the day they announced 8 or 9 years ago that Diablo Canyon would close, I predicted they're going to reverse that decision. And they did. That's been an interesting story to follow. The die-hard local, I live near Diablo Canyon, by the way. All my electricity is carbon-free. I just claim that, even though that's not how it works, I know. But the local environmental groups are still filing lawsuit after lawsuit to try and stop its relicensing and not getting very far with it. But the die-hards are still out against it. The other thing to know about California is the real unpredictable power supply every year is our hydropower. We've got a lot of that, and the amount produced every year by California's hydropower can vary by about 3x, depending on how much rainfall we've had. So in drought years, we don't get very much. In good years, we get a lot. And so that's very good for flexibility of systems, right? This year, actually right now, for the first time in 25 years, all of California is out of drought conditions of any kind, even stage 1 or however they measure these things. And it's still only February, so we'll see. All the reservoirs are full to overflowing right now. So, it's a good year for hydropower, and that changes the prices a bit. Now let's see. But one of the things that's happening when you have the surplus of solar power and wind, if it's going on a good day, is our curtailments are growing, and this is just wind and solar being taken offline. You could say we don't have enough batteries to charge, but we seem to be putting in solar power faster than we're putting in the batteries to soak it up. I think I'd have to do the math on all that, and I want to go back to. Severin Borenstein's calculations on why California's electricity rates then are 3 times higher than Texas. Well, one clue is from this article from the fall that maybe a few of you saw in the Electricity Journal. It was by the Lawrence Berkeley lab, not Borenstein's outfit at the Haas Business School, but they overlap together. And a complicated regression model, lots of caveats about data limitations and so forth. But it said something quite important, that what's happening is behind the meter, that's the phrase that's grown up in the last few years, behind the meter solar systems are cost shifting, especially in California. And one of the things that's driving this is California almost 10 years ago mandated that all new housing had to have solar power systems installed in them, which runs up the cost of new housing and apartments and so forth. And it also said here that they said generally in this study, it's in the highlighted part I've put there in the abstract, is that states that did not have as rigid renewable power standards absorbed more solar and wind without as much price increases or cost shifting. Again, the hypothesis there is that those decisions were driven more by conventional calculations of power providers and utilities about what made the most sense in conventional finance terms. That's my hypothesis. Again, you'd have to unravel this and hope you last longer than the monkey who kills himself. So in California, it's really quite stark how rapidly and dramatically the cost shifting has happened from people who have their solar systems. Borenstein has figured out that the three major utilities, PG&E, SCE, and San Diego Gas and Electric, of the three species of I like to call corporate socialists, PG&E is the worst. Although San Diego Gas and Electric has the highest rates per kilowatt hour, and guess what? That region of the state has the highest penetration of rooftop solar. I think, yeah, here we are. Here's residential consumption is over 30% in the San Diego region, which is quite a lot. And so we can now make out the correlation there. Let's see, what else did he have? Here's the cost shift. Borenstein thinks on the residential level it's as much as $4 billion a year. It's difficult to figure out to the extent to which the cost shift goes to, how much goes to residential and how much goes to commercial and industrial. He thinks it's about 70% to residential, but there's disagreement about all of that. Now, let's see here, maybe like 2 minutes left. Two quick things then. I'm going to skip the Rosenfeld effect, which goes back to the days when people talked about negawatts, and that's a fun story, but leave that for another time. There's the NERC map from recently about this is what grids they think are at risk of disruptions and instability in the next 4 years. You notice California is not on it, whereas Texas is, and a lot of other parts of the country. A lot could be said about that. But the last thing I think I'll do is this. So this is the kind of chart that I will show to students and ask them what's wrong with it. Not that it's false or completely wrong, but you just do I heard the claim, and then I saw this chart, that California has, since the object of all these policies is decarbonization, and then I saw the claim that California hasn't decarbonized any faster or slower than the rest of the country. And to the extent this is true, one reason is half of California's energy is fuel for transport, and that's not going down at all. And we tend to be loading all of our efforts on electricity in so much of the country. Now, we're trying to make up with that with high gasoline prices, that are extensively taxed and regulated. As I like to say, that's, for a lot of people in California, that's not a bug, that's a feature. But I'll leave that aside for now. But here, if you just do a percent reduction, it's the old mathematical or statistical trick where, someone drowns in a lake that averages 2 feet deep. If your baseline is measured on a percent, you may get some area that has more effort, greater baseline starting out with it. And so these numbers, although they're illustrative, I'm asking my graduate students actually to calculate these decarbonization rates with several other different ways of doing it. So for example, I started looking this around 2010, and California, let's go back to 2005, and then I'll stop. 2005, which was the peak of the nation's greenhouse gas emissions on a per capita basis, it was about 20 tons per person in round numbers. California was about 13 tons per person. That's because of our climate, that's because of California's deindustrialization. So you're starting sort of different levels, and when you start doing it just by a percentage basis of overall emissions, it may not be the complete picture. Let's see, what was the last point about that? I've kind of forgotten, but I think I'll just stop there and skip over my gasoline torture horror stories and then go for questions. Yeah, thanks.
I'm going to actually ask the first question, and I hope ties all of this together. And it's actually about the politics of affordability.
Oh.
So, all of the reasons why people are moving out of California, but some of the problems with affordability, I think, are nationwide, and one of those, of course, is the cost of homeowners insurance. I can tell you that at my household, it's a daily thing. Oh, my escrow payment just went up because the damn house insurance went up and I haven't paid it. So we're all familiar with that. But that does actually make it very difficult for young people to buy a house, knowing what it's going to cost them in homeowners insurance. What is going to cost them to run that household with energy and so on. So I want to ask, first I want to ask Jessica, and then I'll open it up for other people. Out of the whole big picture that you presented, do you see any actual policy differences in the affordability of homeowners insurance? If that iron triangle has been somewhat taken apart, is that a fair question? Are you following me?
Yeah, I would say, so the public's struggle with homeowners insurance dates back, at least, in my view, it dates back at least to the 60s, where there were reoccurring instabilities by price changes that led the states to grow their residual markets. That whole history is kind of washed over as people have been talking about climate. And I think I would even say that there has been some very good conversations coming out from the circles that are more oriented towards climate advocacy and using insurance to make that case, where they're saying, oh, well, we can fix it this way, we can fix it that way. That's great, but they latch on to the climate change issue, which kind of makes it false, even if they have a great idea. So the problem is that the two issues, the affordability matter needs to be separated from the climate matter. And the affordability insurance issue seems to be something that deserves better critical engagement with from policymakers, but for whatever reason, they feel not so moved to do it unless it's latched onto the climate issue, and then you have a select group that's interested in doing it. So, I guess what I would say is the issue that we're facing with insurance, which comes and goes in the public's consciousness depending on like what's going on with pricing, has been going on for a long time. And it's, in part, I believe, it's related to the way the homeowner's insurance package was delivered at a discounted price in the very beginning in 1950. So what they said is, like, we're trying to make this policy that gets married with our interest in growing the economy with mortgages. We're going to create this like discounted package, the homeowner's insurance package. The bank said, okay, and banks in 38 said, in order to have homeowners insurance, you need to have certain coverages. Those coverages got wrapped into homeowners, and now in order to get a mortgage, you need homeowners. So the affordability of insurance became tied to getting a house, and then it became like economic policy. So the whole thing goes like way back, but we only talk about it like in a very, we only look at it as a very short time scale discussion.
I have a very cynical, simple view, which is the affordability of homeowners, home and casualty, auto insurance, workers' comp varies from state to state in inverse proportion to the strength of the trial bar in that individual state. Not entirely true, but Florida has had a big problem first with homeowners insurance rates here the last few years, and auto insurance rates, and the legislature got after it because they don't like trial lawyers very much, I think, and rates have come way down. But then, yeah, you throw in the climate overlay. I know I'm overly cynical, and this is oversimplistic and hyperbole, but I always thought a lot of the insurers thought, climate change is a great thing to throw into the regulatory mix to justify a higher rate. And so regardless of how serious you think, how it all plays out in the actual numbers of it, I thought, how convenient. And I thought competition will eventually wear that down, and again, that would be a detailed inquiry, but that's all. I always thought the marketplace would catch up to that and discipline it to some extent.
Do we have any questions? Yes.
Yeah. Well, you were supposed to wait for a microphone,
yeah,
remember? Yeah.
He's coming.
Yeah.
He's coming.
Hi, maybe a few things. So the first one, very often when I participate in this type of talks, specifically energy, people tend to avoid nuclear, and they don't include that in the equation of energy. And to me, I challenge and question the reliability of the information that I'm consuming, because if we say we trust in research and evidence, a lot of people have said that we cannot move on to tripling energy capacity without the help of nuclear. So is nuclear even in your mind? What do you think about it? And also, since I have not heard anything that relates to the topic of rethinking energy, climate strategy, or in a AI-driven economic, can you please give just one bullet point on what we can do regarding those two things? Innovation in energy and also climate strategy for AI-driven economic.
I'll take the first one, since I think I talked to the second one in my remarks. Nuclear is, I think, absolutely part of our future, and there's a lot of innovation going on, both institutional innovation in terms of rethinking the regulatory landscape, as well as the technological innovation. And so, there are new reactor designs that are coming out of research labs and out of universities all the time. Whether or not they actually pan out and are commercializable is that's the big hurdle. And that's where some of, I think, the micro reactors are now, and the SMRs are probably going to be there within the next year or so. The standard kind of large-scale light water reactor, Westinghouse AP1000 reactor design that we have now, that was done at very, very, very much over budget in Vogtle in Georgia, is still, if you were able to wrap that technology around a stable, well-trained workforce that can actually work on nuclear and can get like steady employment in the US, then that would help bring the costs down. So I think nuclear is certainly part of this. And with respect to the data centers, all the hyperscalers have some kind of investment partnership with some form or another of a nuclear, from either well-established to startup. So like Microsoft is doing things in Wyoming with Terra Energy. Google has an investment partnership. I can't remember the name of the company, but so nuclear is definitely part of the pipeline, but it's bigger and takes longer, and it's more expensive. And so, figuring that out is really tricky.
Oh, what a frustrating topic. I actually know the person. Oh, well, I'll put it this way. I said that I never thought I'd live long enough to see progressive YIMBYs, saying we overregulate housing. The other one is environmentalists who say now are pro-nuclear power. So I actually know the person who he persuaded Governor Newsom to change his mind on Diablo Canyon and go to great expense to keep it open. And so the guy's a lifelong environmentalist, about my age, and he said, yeah, the single biggest mistake in my career was opposing nuclear power when I was 25 and, marching in protest. So that's a huge change. It means, I think, that you will not face the political obstacles. There may still be litigation stuff, but then the other thing is, I've got a data series that shows that China's building, 25 reactors now? It's a big number. And their costs are a fraction of ours or other people that. Now, are those figures true? I always worry about Chinese data, but I don't know. I think it's the scale thing. I hear all the enthusiasm for small modular reactors. I hope it's right. I don't have enough expertise to judge it, but it seems to me that we may see, I never thought I'd hear this, and suddenly here we are, and it happened really fast. So that ought to be encouraging, I think.
I was going to give a whirl. So I was talking to a couple of people earlier today, and we were talking about the history that you need to give, and this is just life, right? Like, the state of our policies are such that in order to explain now to the new generation of students why things are the way they are, requires like this whole discussion about, post World War II decision making and going on and on. And so the other day, I'm teaching a 200 level environmental politics class. And I don't remember what it was that I gave them to read, but it was something. And then I was like, 350.org, and it was blank stares everywhere. And I was like, oh, wow. So like this whole discussion of like how we got here on climate and what to do next, the level of unpacking that's now required to discuss what happened is a lot. And I don't know what you do about that. I don't know. I guess the answer of like how this is all going to unfold going forward, but it's been a long journey. It's been a complicated one. I'd also say that even though they didn't know of these like main players from that sort of founded the whole movement, the heuristics are there. The constant moving back to like they delayed action. The only reason that we don't have different energy is because they didn't want to do it. It was the fossil fuel industry. Like the disasters are getting worse because of climate change. So like even though the climate change is not necessarily the most important thing that they're thinking about, and they don't necessarily know the history of the movement, the heuristics are all there and they're deeply embedded. And so how do you deal with all that without having to give somebody a 101 on like everything that happened since 1987 is hard. I'm not really quite sure what to do. There's a question.
He's got one more. Wait for the mic, I think they're telling us, because they're,
It's being recorded, so.
yeah, sorry.
So in theory, I would say nuclear sounds reasonable, but in practice, it's been horrible. And where would you propose building the nuclear waste site? Not too many states want it, but it's right now you're storing it on site. I don't think that's long term. And then plus, if China's so good at it, maybe you want Chinese wages?
Well, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, well, we did build a nuclear waste site in Nevada until the political class there. By the way, my in-laws are from Nevada. I've been there for 75 years. They all wanted it in their backyard. So I don't know. The big decision there is, are we going to decide to reprocess fuel or not? Because then it shrinks from a pretty small amount to a really tiny amount. We've always been against that for nuclear proliferation reasons. I understand that in the abstract, but nobody else is eschewing reprocessing. Everybody else does it. So that genie is out of the bottle. So it becomes a much tinier problem if we do that. So that's one part of it. I'm not sure how the Chinese are doing it. I'll keep up with that.
I think one last question we had here.
Thank you. This question is really about Texas. So everything being built is wind, solar, batteries. The Texas Energy Fund has been largely a failure. And how do we keep prices low without a capacity market in Texas? How does thermal generation ever really show up?
Lynn?
I'm trying to think of how spicy to make my answer to this.
Oh, go all the way.
Given that we're going into having cocktails. So one question might be, and I will say this just because in the things that I've published and been a co-author on with respect to Texas, especially post Uri, I've been very critical of the legislature's actions. And I think that and even longer than that, and for like the past 20 some odd years, I've been very critical of wholesale power market designs that involve forward capacity mechanisms. And one of the things that ERCOT does really well, and that other wholesale power markets in the US do very badly, is deal with relative scarcity. And none of them do it perfectly. And I think if you really peel back the onion to the main determining factor, it's the price caps, right? That we just do not have the political guts to let prices do their job. And Texas has had a high price cap. when Uri happened, that price cap was controversial and brought down. But even before that, you know, they had the operating reserve demand curve, the ORDC, that was kind of a bolt-on, administratively determined way to deal with, you know, what happens when prices get high. How do you get the higher cost, but at the time high value generation to come to the market? And that's the real problem with that capacity mechanism. Forward capacity mechanisms are supposed to solve. Other states, in particular PJM in the Mid-Atlantic, has shown that they don't do that. And so I would say that I would avoid capacity mechanisms because they don't do what they say on the tin. And so my spicy question back is challenging the premise that we need thermal generation, right? Do we need thermal generation? And in particular, this is, and I apologize because you really picked on one of my pet peeves, so I apologize, but this is an industry where we talk about capacity all the time, and now that these technologies are so heterogeneous, I don't care how big you are, I care what you can do for me. And so I think we should shift from talking about capacity to talking about capabilities. And so if you have a well-structured enough portfolio of different markets, you know, a day-ahead energy market, an hourly energy market, a 15-minute energy market, all your ancillary services, reg up, reg down, all the, and you specify and you say, okay, I'm going to show up. Here's my bid. Here's what I say I'm going to do. And then if you don't do it, you penalize the bejesus out of them, right? And you know, I think that's much better than these forward capacity mechanisms, and also more technology agnostic, because I think one thing that has been unproductive in the past 5 years since Uri is the lack of technology agnosticism and all the blaming and finger pointing.
Is Wiki still here, or did that rat leave? At the last panel, he clearly has a Jones for Tom Steyer. Okay. Steyer's running for governor, and he's blanketing the TV with ads right now saying that the main thing he's going to do is make the utilities lower electricity costs by 25%. And that's when I said, I got to call Lynn, man. I mean, you know, somebody remind California, how did it work out 25 years ago when we tried price caps on the utilities? Yeah. And we had rolling blackouts? Oh, that worked really well. Let's go back to that. Yeah. Right. Or not, right? I think,
or not.
Okay.
Or not.
But that's the answers that are being given.
I think we're out of time, folks. Can we give this panel a hand?